If there's one brand that's likely the most divisive watch brand above all others, it's Rolex. Not Hublot, not Richard Mille, not Patek, it's Rolex. There are two very distinct camps when it comes to Rolex. The haters and the lovers. And the haters hate this brand more than pretty much any other brand gets hate in the world. And likewise, the lovers. If you're new to this whole watch thing, then you're likely curious as to who's right. Is it those lovers or those haters? The thing we're going to talk about today is Rolex. What's true about Rolex and what's not, and what people get wrong about Rolex. We're going to dispel some of the myths, and we're going to try to set the record straight. For the lovers and the haters, this video is going to make no difference. They will likely not budge an inch no matter what is said, and they will challenge everything I say if it does not conform to their own opinions. But for the rest, there's a ton of stuff to learn. Let's dive in. First up, Rolex isn't the best brand to talk about on YouTube. A lot of people make the comment about content creators talking too much about Rolex, but the reality is that Rolex was at its height 3 years ago in terms of views. Today, they rarely crack top 5 in terms of views for me. I've got data from my own YouTube analytics and a few other sources, and considering that Rolex does make up 1/3 of all revenue of Swiss watches, you'd think they're the most popular topic on YouTube, but they just aren't. Tudor does better. Omega does better at the moment. Longines usually fares better as well for me. There's also a fair amount of independents that are much more flavor of the day, that pull a lot more clicks and views than Rolex. I've also been tracking grey market dealers, and those that talk about Rolex are down in terms of views as well. Not all of them, but pretty much most of them. Number 2, Rolex is not a non-profit company. This is something that people get wrong all the time. Rolex is a privately held company, and it's held by a non-profit organization. It's held by a foundation. What's important to understand is that this kind of structure is incredibly common in Switzerland. It's also fairly common in Western Europe as well. People make a lot of incorrect assumptions about what this foundation stuff means. First of all, Rolex does pay taxes on their profits. They are, however, allowed to move a certain level of funds to the foundation. And just like a US company that gets a tax deduction for charitable contributions, so does Rolex for what they move to the foundation. Second, the foundation is not just a pile of money that the foundation's administrators can just spend willy-nilly. The foundation is set up legally, and the purpose of the foundation has to be approved by the Swiss government, and the money has to be spent in accordance with this agreement. There's not a lot of detail known specifically about what is agreed between the Swiss government and the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, but it's common knowledge that a lot of the money goes into the local community. Third, what you have to understand about Switzerland and their canton structure is that the Swiss have an unusual approach to taxes. I've got enough friends in Zug who have optimized, and there are two things that you generally need to understand. And this is explanations for laypersons. Those of you that are Swiss tax law experts, take a chill pill. We're keeping it simple. Tax law just really isn't exciting enough for me to spend detailed time on going through the nuances of this. But basically, there are two things that apply. To some extent, you can negotiate how much you pay in taxes as an individual and to some extent as a company. And a lot of things in Switzerland are not considered taxes, but are considered fees. So in Denmark, where I live, we are taxed on a whole lot of things. And part of that money goes to pay for things in the municipality, like garbage. Now, in some cantons in Switzerland, there's no tax that goes to garbage disposal, but everybody voluntarily pays a fee to get their garbage picked up. In principle, you can choose to not pay the fee, but then you have to go to the landfill or something yourself every week. So the reality is most people just pay the fee. Technically, it's not a tax, but when everybody's paying for it, it's really a tax in every way except in name. All of this is important because the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation feeds a large part of their money back into the community, not as a tax, but as fees or contributions or donations. Believing that Rolex or the Wilsdorf Foundation doesn't contribute to the Swiss economy is just false. They are paying taxes, just not in the way that you understand it. Now, having said that, these foundations do have their weaknesses, and lack of transparency is one of them. So although this is a perfectly normal way of doing business in Switzerland with thousands of companies making use of the model, it does have its flaws. But the flaws are not limited to Rolex. It's a general challenge of how these structures work. But for Switzerland in general, This is made for a very rich country, and they do actually have the lights on in government because the money does come through even from those foundations. Whether or not you like Rolex or hate Rolex or have no opinion on Rolex, or you want one or you don't want one, maybe you're new here, maybe you don't know my channel, but if you are enjoying what you're watching and you want to send me the signal that I'm doing something that you appreciate, then please click the subscribe button. It's a great sign, and it's the way I know that I've done something good, and I learn and I can grow and I can make better videos because of it. Thanks a ton. Handmade. So this is a bit of an urban legend. I see it in the comments of a ton of YouTube videos. I see it on Reddit, and I even see videos of people saying it. Rolex has never claimed to completely hand make all their watches, and they don't hand make all their watches. Rolex is a company that has specialized in scale and automation. Everything that is more efficient to do with a machine of some sort is likely being done by a machine. Cases are milled and cut in a CNC machine. The same goes for bracelets and clasps. Movements are milled, coated, treated. All of that's automated processes. Dials are to a large extent machined. Some polishing is done by hand, but sometimes it's by hand with a machine. Setting of dials is a mix of machine automation and hand setting. Gem setting is going to be hand done, but not everything. The assembly of the movement and casing is a manual process, as is the assembly of the bracelet to the case, but even that has levels of automation to it. Regulation is a manual process, but the key to Rolex's success is in large part their ability to build high quality products with high levels of efficient automation. Their watches are not in any way what I would call handmade. They are built by machines and then assembled and regulated by specialists. Rolex are lazy in their designs. There is some truth to this, but the assumption is based on a misunderstanding of the goal of Rolex. Rolex watches are incredibly consistent in their designs. They are probably more consistent than any other major brand out there. If you take an Omega Speedmaster, an Omega DeVille, and a Constellation, you'd be forgiven for thinking 3 different companies made those watches. Some have twisted lugs. Some watches are very dressy and restrained. Some are really out there. Even look at Audemars Piguet and the difference between the Royal Oak and the 1159. There are design cues there, but unless you know what you're looking for, you won't know it. But a GMT bezel looks like a Submariner with a different bezel. The Explorer 2 looks like the GMT, just more rugged. The Datejust looks like a Sky Dweller without the complication, and the Day-Date looks like a Datejust. Even the 1908 has the signature oyster case, and that can feel lazy. But there are 3 things that are important for context. Rolex is popular, among other things, because they're recognizable. The watches looking samey is part of the appeal. It makes for an incredibly consistent experience. Almost anybody will recognize a Rolex from a distance. The sameness of their designs is by design and very much on purpose, and Rolex has no interest in changing that. The sameness is also likely part of what makes Rolex hyper profitable. The more you keep things consistent and samey, the less variance you have in production processes, that leads to higher efficiency. Every time you have to tell a CNC machine to start working on a new route with different tools, that takes time and that costs money. Keeping things simple in terms of variety keeps costs down. This goes for movements, it goes for cases, it goes for clasps, it goes for bracelets. Consistency is also in marketing terms something you want when you're aiming for longevity and desirability. If you, like Rolex, have a dominant position and you're a trusted supplier of luxury items with historical staying power, then you don't want to mix things up too much. Consistency over time is what supports the story of the timelessness of Rolex. Changing things all the time would be counterproductive. But yes, this does lead to things seeming boring. Big one, Rolex watches hold their value. Yes and no. Rule number 1. For 98% of all watches in the world, when you walk out of the store, just like a car, the watch will immediately drop in value. There's no discussion about this. IWC, Omega, JLC, Longines, the price drops immediately and it just goes down from there depending on how you treat your watch. Rule number 2. Rolex have generally not experienced that same drop, and for some watches in the lineup, the price goes up when you walk out of the door. But it would be wrong to conclude that all Rolexes hold their value. So I'm going to give you a cheat sheet on how to figure out where the value drop is the smallest or potentially where the increases typically are. First of all, you have to understand the Rolex lineup. They have 2 lineups, classic and professional. But I prefer to put Rolex on a continuum from dressy to sporty. So at your most dressy option, you've got the 1908. And at the other end of the continuum, you have the Explorer 2. How do you place all the other watches? So if you ignore for the moment the Oyster Perpetual, which I'm going to get back to, you have from right to left or left to right, depending on you're looking at this from a different angle than me. Here you've got the shiniest cases and bracelets, Datejust with the Jubilee. Then you've got the GMTs with the Jubilees. Then you've got the Daytona with the polished center links. And from there you get matte bracelets with ceramic bezels like the Submariner. And on the outer edges you get the matte casing, the matte bracelets, and the matte bezels of the Explorer 2. That's your continuum. Next, you've got levels. At the bottom, you have the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, which is your Rolex starter watch. Above that, you have pretty much all the others in some sort of primarily steel configuration. Above that, you pretty consistently have a two-tone option. So there's a two-tone sub, there's a two-tone Explorer, there's a two-tone GMT, there's a two-tone Datejust. Above that, you see full gold cases with typically an Oyster Flex or a strap, and then a full gold bracelet. Above that, you get platinum, gem setting, that kind of thing. Throughout their lineup, you get options in terms of dials, but the case, the bracelet, and the material are what define the leveling. No other brand does this as well as Rolex does it. Now, the first rule you can apply to this is that the closer to the center of the baseline, the more popular the watch is going to be. The further away in any direction from that center, the less, relatively speaking, it's going to hold its value. The 1908 is not going to hold its value as well as a GMT, and the Explorer 2 is not going to hold its value as well as a Daytona. And also better than a two-tone Daytona or even a gold Daytona. A 126500 Daytona in steel easily still goes for almost double retail, but a 126508 only goes for 4,000 above retail. That's a little bit more than 10%. It's still good, but in pure percentages and real money, the steel Daytona massively outperforms. Then you have one more rule, which is your modifier, and it's a question. And the question is it a specialty item? Rule number 2 is specialty items hold their value better than general items. Normally, a gold Daytona would not be something that holds its value as well as a steel Daytona. But the white gold Le Mans, that's a specialty item. So there, the first rule doesn't quite apply. The same for the Yachtmaster in titanium. It's still, relatively speaking, a specialty item. So it does better than the regular Yachtmaster, which is at the center. And that's all you need to know. Closer to the center, closer to that middle, that's where you're going to have the highest value retention. The further away you get, the less likely it is. Also a big one, Rolex restricts supply. It depends on how you define restricting supply. We're going to have to do a little bit of math, and we're going to need a little bit of data to do the math with. According to industry experts, Rolex makes about 1.2 million watches a year. That's a lot. Now, how many retailers that sell Rolex are there globally? Well, there are about 2,000. That makes for, on average, 600 watches per year per retailer. And I know different stores get different levels of allocations, but on average, each store gets 600 watches a year. Now let's assume that the stores are open 300 days a year. That means every day, these stores are selling on average 2 Rolexes per day. And now we've got another number. There are 60 million millionaires in the world. Denmark, where I live, has 366,000 millionaires. There are only 2-3 official Rolex ADs in Denmark. That's on average 1,800 watches for 366,000 millionaires. So in Denmark, 1,800 watches targeted at 366,000 people, that's 1 Rolex for every 200 Danish millionaires per year. That's 0.5%. Now, go down to your local AD, wherever you are, and just hang around for an hour. It's going to be a little bit awkward, but just pay attention to how many people in 1 hour on a Saturday come in and ask if a Rolex is available. I would guess on a Saturday, in an hour, you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 people coming in. The whole point of this is that there is way more demand than 1.2 million watches can deliver on. I've spoken to ADs and they speak about people walk in, 90% of their customers go straight to the Rolex display. They don't go to Omega, they don't go to Blancpain, they don't go anywhere but to the Rolex display. That's how much time they spend on just talking about Rolex. There is just way more demand than 1.2 million watches can deliver on. Supply doesn't match demand. But does that mean that they are restricting supply? The answer is yes and no. We know that Rolex is busy expanding their production, and estimates vary, but they're expecting to be able to produce anywhere between 1.5 and 2 million watches once everything is up and running. 2 million is still not going to be enough. That might mean 3 watches per day in those stores. Rolex, though, are not in the business of creating oversupply. To maintain desirability, a brand like Rolex does not ever want to meet demand completely. But they are a mass producer and they want to meet a lot of the demand. So they're not artificially holding back product that isn't selling. They are choosing to produce a number which they think will support the desirability aspect of their product without undercutting people's expectations of what a reasonable waiting time for a Rolex should be. On top of that, you've got the ADs. Are they restricting supply? Again, this is a stronger yes, but it's also with context. Because what do you want as any store owner? You want business. And what do you want even more than that? You want repeat business. Now, you've got a hyper desirable product that everybody wants. What do you do with it? Well, you limit some of your supply of those hyper desirable products to existing customers who do a lot of repeat business. Or you allocate it to new customers in the hope that they will become repeat customers. It's that simple. I'm lucky enough to get calls from a specific AD who offer me specialty items because I'm a repeat customer. I also haven't bought as much on the secondary market, which means for some brands I've paid too much, but it has over time contributed to me building a relationship with an AD that leads me to be offered watches that other people would wait years for. Personally, I don't see this as shady or as restricting supply, but just intelligent product allocation. Then, one more thing. Those 600 watches on average, or 2 watches a day. Remember that those 600 watches are Oyster Perpetuals, Datejusts, Submariners, Explorers, Two-Tone Oyster Flexes, and 1908s. The individual references are a fraction of that number. How many of those 600 watches are Daytonas? 100? 50? 20? 5? When you do the numbers, you just see how much of an imbalance there is between demand and the real supply of those specific desirable SKUs. Nobody cares about your Rolex. This is such a massively contextual assumption. If I go to a watch meet with watch nerds and I'm wearing a Rolex Submariner, nobody, and I mean nobody's going to care. It's going to get zero attention, at least if it's a current production model and not some 1960s original. If I walk into a boardroom full of 10 or 15 executives, there are going to be at least 3 Rolexes in that room. Nobody is going to care in that room either. If I'm at a watch meet at Watches and Wonders or Geneva Watch Days, a Rolex is going to get zero attention in an ocean of Jeans and Gribble Forces and Acrivias. In all of those situations, nobody gives a flying fart. Most Rolexes are not noteworthy or special to those kinds of people in those kinds of settings. Now, in Denmark, most of the time, nobody cares about external status symbols. People notice which chair you own, but not which watch. If you're 23 years old and studying liberal arts and you wear a Rolex, people will notice and they're potentially going to judge you negatively. You should be wearing a Nomos after all. It's not a mainstream status symbol. And then there's the general public. Most people, unlike me, don't spend their days staring at other people's wrists. Of all the body parts, wrists are not high on the list of things regular, well-adjusted, mentally stable people look at. These normies just don't notice your watch at all. And my point is, on average, you're more likely to go through life with the vast majority of people on the planet not caring about your watch at all, regardless of the name on the dial. Most people just don't care about watches. And the rest, some think it's cool and some think Rolex is just a basic watch. So sure, you might get someone saying cool watch to you, but you don't really know. Did cool watch mean cool watch, I'm impressed with you and what you have achieved with your life? Or did it mean, what a douche? Or did it mean I told him it was a cool watch and I just did it to get him to stop talking about watches? Or did it mean, note to self, I'm going to rob this guy later tonight? You don't know. And honestly, you really shouldn't care. Rolex produces a lot of watches. They've been doing it for 100 years, a little bit more. They are pretty good at what they do, and they have a big pile of money to throw into R&D and production improvement. They are probably one of the best mass producers of watches at that price point in the world. There's no getting around that. But if I take a magnifying glass and look at the hands of a Rolex compared to the hands of a Grand Seiko, the Grand Seiko hands are sharper and cleaner. If I take a Rolex case and compare it on close inspection to an Omega, I'm going to be hard pressed to decide which one is better, even though an Omega is almost in all cases going to be cheaper. I can probably find some mid-tier independent brand that has a higher tolerance or tighter tolerance in terms of bezel alignment than Rolex. And there are two things at play here. One, manufacturing on a lot of things, not everything, has become democratized and incredibly accessible. Rolex doesn't have access to better machines. For a large portion of what goes into a watch, any brand with the money can replicate whatever machine quality they want. Two, quality is always a question of priorities. Rolex doesn't mill the underside of the Submariner case with a thin lug bevel to make wearability with a NATO strap more comfortable. They don't do that because they know that 99% of all Rolex Submariner buyers are never, ever, ever, ever going to take off the bracelet. So it's a pointless piece of machining that costs money for no real benefit. Omega does it though on the Seamaster 300M, at least on my model, because Omega tries to sell customers on extra straps and NATOs, and they generally prioritize options as selling points. Grand Seiko's selling point is, among other things, their dials. That's why their dials are so good. It's kind of the whole point. Three, being a lower high-end brand like Omega or Rolex, because they're not high-end, Patek is high-end, they don't need perfection. It requires excellence, but not perfection. A Grübel Force requires perfection. A Jean requires perfection. A Rolex just needs to be, relatively speaking, good enough to justify the price for most buyers. Rolex doesn't cut corners, but they also don't embellish where they don't need to from a commercial standpoint. They don't have customers that demand quick release bracelets, so they don't make it. They don't make intricate dials because their customers generally don't care. They just want a nice Sunray dial. Rolex is as good as they need to be for the price and the customer they are serving. Nothing more, nothing less. Rolex is all marketing. This is objectively wrong, but I understand why people feel this way. Rolex didn't always make everything in-house. Them controlling almost the entire production process from end to end is basically only something that applies to this millennium. Before that, movements, cases, bracelets, dials, tons of things were outsourced. Rolex didn't make the first waterproof watch. The Rolex Explorer was not on the wrist of Edmund Hillary when he summited Everest for the first time. Rolex didn't make the first automatic movement. The point is, there's a lot of brand perception to Rolex that isn't real. And yes, people do just want the logo, but they are good watches. They aren't lemons, to borrow a term from the world of car dealerships. They are good, and there is a quality to them. Whether you think the marketing lives up to the hype, that's a personal perspective. You will be robbed. Are you more likely to be robbed if you wear a Rolex? Statistically, yes, probably. I'm not worried where I live. But am I going short sleeve and two-tone Submariner on the streets of Sao Paulo, Johannesburg, or London? Probably not. Am I more at risk when wearing a Rolex compared to wearing an Omega? Yes. The watches are more recognizable. Pros will know that a Speedy is also worth money, but a Rolex will also attract the opportunistic thief. This will always depend on the specific country and city you're in, and the setting and your other behavior. And I'm not losing any sleepless nights, but as with everything, I adjust my behavior according to the reality around me. And interestingly, and this might be an urban legend, but I remember watching a video of a guy getting pickpocketed or robbed of his watch. And it was a Richard Mille. And I think shortly after, the thief came back when he realized that he had stolen a fake. So he returned the watch. That's how good these thieves are. And even the thieves don't want your fake Richard Mille shitter. So yes, there's a bit of risk associated with a Rolex, but it is with luxury watches in general. I've been doing this YouTube thing as a side hobby for 3 years now. I enjoy it immensely and I love interacting with the community that has spawned around my channel. I've also learned some things. One of them is haters are going to hate and lovers are going to love. And they are unlikely to be swayed by anything I say. Myself, I quite like Rolex for what they are. I'm also very aware of what they're not. I own a couple, but I don't fawn over everything they do just because it's Rolex. They are hugely successful and they are good watches. I've spoken to a lot of insiders in the industry and Rolex is universally respected for their marketing and their products. They're hard to get a hold of and it does great also on me. I get it. But the blind hate and the blind love, that's just not me. And no, they're not made in China. The absurdity of that claim is so insane, and I'm not even going to bother with debunking it. That's going to get some comments as well, but I can live with that. So, what are your thoughts on Rolex? Where are you on the scale from hate to love? Share in the comments. Keep the tone professional because this is a love or hate topic. Stay classy. Like, subscribe. Cheers.